Good afternoon, everybody. It's so nice to be here in Taiwan, and thank you so much for coming to this workshop. When I arrived, I could first of all feel the absolute beauty of the spirit of the people of Taiwan. I could see the beauty in the spirit of the land and the mountains that you have around you, and that has filled my heart, and it's so nice to be with you today. I'm also here with other international visitors. So we have over here at this front table, we have Machiko Ohara, who is the Asia Pacific President for IFSW. And we also have Victor. Victor, I can never pronounce your last name.
Virag.
Victor Virag, thank you so much, who is the IFSW Asia Pacific Treasurer, and they both also represent Japanese Federation of Social Workers. So we come from different cultures, and it's an opportunity to learn from each other, but I have to ask you a question. I have to stand today because in my culture, my mother always taught her children, if you have something to say, you stand. And what I know in my culture is that you must always do what your mother said. Is that the same here in Taiwan? Okay, I have been asked to speak specifically about how social work can be sustainable. And I've come with some examples from around the world. We're going to do a tour of social work around the world. But I have also learnt something from you. I've learnt something from Taiwanese social work when we were able to visit an agency 2 days ago called the Riram Novaram Centre. Does anyone know this centre? Okay, I think we have to find a way to present their work to you because their work is world-class, first-class social work that would stand equally alongside any other example of sustainability in social work. And I know that when there's one piece of good social work in the country, there will be many. So I acknowledge your professors, I acknowledge your university staff, I acknowledge your supervisors, I acknowledge all the people that have contributed to the development of social work in Taiwan. And I especially acknowledge the Taiwanese Association of Social Workers. They have brought the three of us here to meet with you and also to learn from you. And I want to congratulate them because they have now become, all social workers in Taiwan have now become full members of the international profession that stand equally with every other member. And we are so happy to have Taiwan in the international family of social work. Is everybody here a member of the association? Who is a member? Oh, wonderful. Many, many people. Wonderful. Congratulations. Congratulations to you. I want to just start my presentation just as a reminder of the importance and value of social work to every society. And if you're not yet a member of the association, I urge you and encourage you to join because being a member of an association helps your learning, it helps you find friends and colleagues, and it helps support the development of the profession. And social work is so important to every country. And we know this not just because I say it, we know this from research, from facts. This is a cover of a book, which is in English. I don't know if it's in other languages, I'm sorry for that. But in this book is published research on the importance of social work and social services. What this book has done is it's brought together 2 universities in the world. One is called Oxford University in England. It's a prestigious university. And the other is called Princeton University in the United States. And that's also a prestigious university. And the researchers from the policy departments have evaluated what happens to the economy when you employ social workers. So for every dollar or yen or ruble or any currency, Taiwanese dollar, American dollar, UK pound, for every dollar that is spent on social work and social services, what is the return, the economic impact? How does that contribute to the economy? This is a question I have for you. For every dollar that any government spends on social work, what is the return to the economy? What do you think? If the government spends $1, do we get $1.50 back? 10? Okay, so we have someone saying $10. For every dollar the government spends on social work and social services, there's a $10 return to the economy. Is that too high or too low? Too low? Okay. Do you know here in Taiwan the answer? You should find out. Okay, across the world, the average is $3 for every dollar invested. But in some countries like Brazil and South America, it's $16 for every dollar invested. Okay, so people are thinking, why? How does this work? Is it magic? So when we employ social workers in communities, more children go to school. More people go to work or create work opportunities. More people use health facilities more appropriately. And workplace productivity increases. So these are really important arguments for every social worker to know, that your work helps build your economy. You're not just supporting the people that you work with, you're supporting your country and your economy. Okay, so we're going to start talking about social work examples across the world. And what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about different countries, and I'm going to ask you to work at your table at the end of each example to think of 2 questions. First one would be, how is this example of social work sustainable? How does it lead to a sustainable outcome? And the second part is, what are the social work principles that have helped this example of social work to develop? I was told that the people in Taiwan are very shy and not very confident at speaking loudly in the classroom. So I'm going to give the first example, and I will give the reflection on why it's sustainable and the social work principles. And then the next example, I will ask you to do it. The first example is very personal to me because it involves a social work student teaching me something very important in my understanding of social work. And this took place in 2013. Actually, are there any social work students here? Good. Just remember, social work students can also teach their professors. We learn from each other. Okay, so in 2013, I had a job to do in the international profession, and that was to run workshops and coordinate discussion on what should be the international definition of social work. And so I had to travel around the world, and I had to meet people exactly like you, social workers like you, and students too, and ask them what did they think should be in an international definition. And do you know, I got a lot of challenge. People would say to me, how can you have one description of social work when we have so many cultures and so many different social economic situations? How can social work be the same, for example, in New York, or in a slum in Kenya? And I found these questions hard to answer. But a young man from Somalia, a social worker who was about the age of 23 or 24, whose name was Muhammad, he helped me with the answer. I was in an African regional social work conference, asking people for their opinions about the definition, and I'd finished making a speech just like today, and I came off the stage and I walked down the steps down the stage, and as always there was a big line of people, mostly students, and they wanted to have a photo. Please, Dr. Rory, can we have a photo? Okay. Please, Dr. Rory, can we have a photo? Okay. And I noticed at the back of the line was a very tall, young, dark-skinned African man. And he waited patiently, and when everybody else was gone, he came and stood in front of me, and I looked up at him. And he looked down at the floor, and he said, Dr. Rory, I've heard you on the stage. Thank you for your information, but I would like to know about you and your social work. So I told him that I'd done my social work training in New Zealand, and I'd worked in mental health, I'd worked in community development. And then I said, where are you from and what is your name? And he kept looking at the floor, not at my eyes, at the floor. And he said, Dr. Rory, my name is Muhammad and I am from Somalia. And I was interested. I'd never met a Somalian social worker before. Do people know where Somalia is? It's in Africa, yeah, exactly. Okay, and it's a very poor country. Has anyone been to Somalia?
And also that somebody said pirates.
Yes, pirates. Yes, they have pirates on the coastline of. So I'd never talked to a Somalian social worker before. I thought, oh, this will be interesting. Mohammed, please tell me about social work in Somalia. And he looked at the floor and he said, it's just like you said. It's just like your experience in New Zealand. It's just like what you do, Dr. Rory. And I said, Mohammed, you can call me Rory. You don't need to call me Dr. Rory. And he said, no, in my culture, I must address you by your title. And I was thinking, it's not right what he says. Social work is not the same in Somalia as in New Zealand. It can't be. It must be very, very different. So I asked him again. And again, Mohammed said, just like you, Dr. Rory. And I asked him a third time. And he said, just like you do, Dr. Rory. And so I said, Mohammed, what did you do last week? What social work did you do last week? Because I had to drag the information from him. And he said, last week I had heard that there was a woman in a nomadic tribe. She had become pregnant without being married. And in the culture of this tribe, he knew that he needed to go and see what he could do to support the situation. And I said, Mohammed, what happens? What's the situation with the culture of this tribe? What happens to a woman, she was 16 years old, when she is pregnant but not married? What happens? And Mohammed was still looking at the ground. And when I'd ask him this question, he looks right down at the ground. And he says, Dr. Rory, I am so ashamed. But when people live in absolute poverty, they look for hope in the most extreme forms of religion. And when a woman is not married, she will be thrown out of the tribe and she would die by herself. So I was glad I was asking Mohammed about these situations because he said his social work was just like mine. But in New Zealand, yes, women get killed for being pregnant in family situations, but they're not thrown out of a nomadic tribe. And so it felt like quite a different social situation and social context to the one of which I knew. So what did you do, Mohammed? He said, the first thing I did is I went and found the young woman still in the village. And I asked her, would you like me to be your social worker? And I thought, yes, that's what I would do. I would ask the permission of the client. Do they want a social worker? And then what did you do, Mohammed? He said, the young woman said yes. So then he went to speak to her mother and father. And he said he had to spend 4 hours negotiating and talking with the mother because the mother was so full of shame. The woman, by being pregnant and not married, had brought such shame to the family. And so the mother actually wanted the daughter to be thrown out of the tribe where she would die. But Mohammed negotiated with the mother and said, if we can get the tribal elders, the chiefs, to agree that she can stay in the tribe, will you take her back into the home? And the mother and father said yes. And I was starting to think, Mohammed might be right. Maybe he does work the same as me. First of all, he gets the client's permission, consent. That's important in social work. Then he starts to do family work. That's what I do when I'm a practitioner as well. So I said, Mohammed, what did you do next after seeing the mother and the father? And he said, well, then I went to another family that had many goats. And he asked the family with many goats, if this young woman is allowed to stay in the community, in the tribe, would you be willing to lend her 4 goats for 1 year? And Mohammed explained to me that to have, in their culture, to have goats is a sign of status, it's a sign of wealth. The goats bring fertilizer, the goats bring milk, and the goats can breed and they bring meat. So it's a sustainable form of income. So I'm thinking, yes, Muhammad is doing the social work I recognise in a very different context. Consent, family work, mobilising resources. He then went to the chief of the village and he said respectfully to the chief, I want to ask for your reconsideration on this young woman to be able to stay in the village. I want to inform you that she is now a woman that has the ability to have her own goats as an independent woman. That her mother and father, if you allow her to stay, will offer her further support and protections. The village chief responded, this young woman now has goats. There will be many young men that will want to marry her. She can stay. So that is what I did, Dr. Rory, last week. And I was thanking him and saying he is helping me with my job of understanding that there is a connection for us, all the social workers, whether we practice in Taipei, whether we practice in Somalia, whether we practice in New York. There is a methodology that we share. But Muhammad, still looking at the ground, said, but Dr. Rory, I have not finished. As a social worker, Dr. Rory, we have an obligation to challenge the culture of the tribe because more young women may become pregnant and not married. So when I am finished at this conference, I am going back to that tribe and I will offer to give them psychosocial education on supporting all people, whether they become pregnant or not. And also, Dr. Rory, he said to me, I never asked her about her pregnancy. And women need to be safe in this community. So to raise the issues of how the community can protect itself and support women in this situation. So he was going to go back and do this education with the community. And I kept in touch with Muhammad, and he did exactly that, and he raised awareness. And the village, the nomadic group, formed a committee to discuss these issues and how they can protect women in the future. So Muhammad taught me. He became my professor. I thought he had finished his story when the woman's life was saved. But he taught me that social work is much more than this. Social work is about changing the system, and that is where sustainability begins. So that's the end of that example, and I've already shared with you some of the social work principles that he and I had in common, that we as social workers have in common. And from there, personally, inside myself, I felt confident in leading a process to have a global definition. I'm going to give 2 more or maybe 3 more examples in our time together, and one of them will be around how social workers have changed the law. But the next one I want to talk about is something from your region, not far from here, and that's some social work in the Philippines. In 2013, there was a typhoon, Typhoon Yolanda. Does anyone remember that? Yes? Yeah. It was the biggest typhoon in this district ever. In fact, the meteorologists, the weather scientists, measured the wind to be 500 kilometers per hour. And the typhoon swept across the Philippines and had huge damage in the little islands at the edge of the country. And 3 months after the typhoon, the Social Workers Association of the Philippines asked me to come to give some support to the frontline social workers who had been working every day, 7 days a week, every hour that they could, even though they had lost members of their family and lost members of their community. And the social workers were exhausted, so they invited me to come and meet with them. And we went to 2 islands that were very badly damaged. This one was called Tacloban, an island in the Philippines. Has anyone been to Tacloban? No? Okay. So in the cyclone, 80% of the population died. And when I went there, the bodies were still under the rubble, under the houses that had fallen down. And there was many United Nations agencies and other international humanitarian organizations already there. But the people were in shock. Of course, there was trauma. And every day they waited because at 12 o'clock a truck could come into the island from a boat and deliver food and water. And so they would wait every day for this humanitarian aid to come to this island. Now there were social work survivors that were helping, and they had gone to the mayor who was coordinating the recovery and said, look, we can help, we're social workers, we have skills. And the mayor had said to them, thank you so much. What I want you to do is help people who have lost their birth certificate, any identity documents, to record their names. The social worker said, we can do more than this. And the mayor said, look, I'm a busy man. You do this. And that's what the social workers were asked to do. You know, I met with the social workers and they were so traumatized. They were in such a bad condition. They had lost their family members, they had lost members of their team. This is your colleagues, it's very sad. But there was social workers who felt huge guilt for something. They felt guilt because the meteorologists had warned everybody in the whole of the Philippines that this big typhoon was coming. So they organized for people to go into the one house that was 3 stories high that could stand up to a storm. This house was owned by Imelda Marcos. Who knows that name? You remember Imelda Marcos? Yes. She had shoes, yeah? Many shoes. She was a politician in the Philippines, but she was most well known because her husband ruled very with great determination. Some people called him a dictator for, I think, 30 years, and she was the wife of this man. So the social workers asked Imelda Marcos, they said, you have the house made of brick. All the people who live in a slum, but you have a house made of brick. Can we put people in your house when this typhoon comes? And Miss Marcos said yes. She wasn't there. It was her holiday home. And so it was 3 stories. So they put as many people in this house as they could, on the first floor, on the second floor, and on the 3rd floor. And they waited for the storm to come. Then the storm came, and remember I said it was 500 kilometers per hour, the biggest storm recorded ever in the world. And something happened that was new for the meteorologists, the weather people, and a new term came about. We know about tsunami, but it wasn't a tsunami, it was from wind. It was called a storm surge, and that is when the wind picks the water up from the sea and throws it over the land. And so the water came into the 1st floor, and all the people were trying to get up to the 2nd floor. They were standing on top of each other trying to get up the stairs. Then the water came in to the 2nd floor, and all the people were trying to get to the 3rd floor. And then the water came into the 3rd floor, and everyone in the building died. So when I came to the Philippines, our poor colleagues, they were so traumatized. They would just cry and cry and cry because there was someone from the outside just to hear them. I'll come back to Tacloban in a moment, but we went to another island called Coron, which is on the other side of the Philippines. It also had 80% loss of life. And there was a difference here because, again, the mayor of the island was responsible for the coordination of the recovery. But this time, the mayor wanted to utilize social work in a different way. The mayor used to be a social worker, a woman. Woman mayors are good. So in the days just after the typhoon had calmed, she called the police, she called the engineers, she called the social workers, and she said, I want you to come and sit at the table here with me and help me make decisions on the recovery of our people. To the police, I want you to make sure that there's no looting and no crime. I want you to make sure that the children who have lost their parents aren't vulnerable to child trafficking. To the engineers, I want you to tell me which roads can be cleared quickly so we can get vehicles moving. To the social workers, I want you to tell me who in the population has survived and how they can help in the recovery, how the citizens can help. The social workers said, yes, ma'am, we will help, we will do what you ask, but we want to ask something from you. And I love social workers, because if they can create an opportunity to get more of a social work approach, they will ask for it. They're good advocates. And they suggested that to the mayor, the mayoress, the woman mayor, that this recovery is going to change the island. Many people will come to offer support in the coming weeks and months. But can we agree at this strategic table on two social work principles? One is that the survivors, the citizens of the island, must be involved in all the decisions that affect their futures. And the second one is, can we use this crisis as an opportunity for capacity building to improve the lives from pre-Yolanda conditions? The mayor said yes. So I just want to go back to Tacloban, and this, I took these photos. These are my photos. When I went to Coron, all the rubble had been cleared because of these two principles that your colleagues, social workers, advanced. Because as UN agencies, US aid, Canada aid, Australia aid, perhaps Taiwan aid, I don't know, came in, everybody that sat around that table had to agree to these two principles because the mayor told them. The first thing the social workers advocated for was that they should pay the survivors, the citizens, the traumatized citizens, should be paid to help clean the rubble away and to bury the dead bodies. They should be paid to do that. And it was agreed through a United Nations agency that they would be paid $5 a day, $5 a day. Now for fishermen, because they were fisher folk, this was a lot of money. This was a huge amount of money. And they were so happy to get the money. For the UN, it was nothing. Hardly seen on the balance sheet. Because of the agreement at the strategic table that they had to consult the survivors, there was a question on where should we build the new village? Where? And people in the mayor's office and in the funding agencies wanted the villagers to build it in the middle of the island, because there could be another cyclone, another typhoon, and it would be safer for them in the middle of the island or in the mountains. But the people said no. They said, we know one day all this money will go away. All this money will go away. Our $5 a day will stop, and we will have to go back to fishing. We can't make money in the mountains. We have to have a village by the sea. And the social workers encouraged the citizens. If this is your view, keep your argument. Don't agree. If this is your view, you advocate for yourselves. And a compromise was found to rebuild a settlement in an area that had close access to the mountain so that they could escape to the mountain if there was another storm to come. And everybody was happy. So with the $5 a day, the villagers or the citizens worked alongside international support and learnt new skills. For example, how to build houses out of timber rather than bamboo. The timber could all be got from the island. It all came from the island. And so they started with the $5 a day to reconstruct and rebuild their new village. And it was more stronger, it was better housing than they had before. They also established a school, and this is them building the school. I took this picture. It came after building the houses. And they said, Mr. Rory, you are from the West. None of us went to school because we're just fishing people. And this is the first time we built a school. What qualities do you look for in a teacher? Please tell us. So I'll just conclude, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. What I saw and what the reality was in this island is we had a mayor that would understand the social work approach. We had social workers who were able to advocate social work principles. By the time I arrived, all the bodies had been buried. The housing was being built. The school was being built for the first time. The trauma on the faces was not as strong as in Tacloban. And we know this. We know that when people who are traumatized are active in their own recovery, the symptoms of trauma are lower. What I witnessed was an engaged community that, despite having gone through a massive, massive trauma, felt confident about the future and about rebuilding their lives. Meanwhile, back in Tacloban, they were still waiting for the truck to come at 12 o'clock every day. The people did not have their dignity. And this photo was taken 18 months later in Tacloban. Still every day at 12 o'clock, 18 months later. And this is the difference between a humanitarian aid approach and a social work approach. And so it's a horrible example, and I feel so sorry for the people of Tacloban. But it's one of the very rare occasions in which we can say this is the difference between a social work approach and a humanitarian aid approach. Same country, same people, same conditions, but one had a mayor that understood social work and one didn't. I'm just going to ask you now to talk with people around you, and if you can give me your reflections on this example, what social work principles do you see that drove the profession? And what reflections do you have on sustainable social work as a result of hearing this? And any other questions or thoughts that you have. Many of the comments have asked a question. What are the principles that we have in social work that ensure sustainability? And I think we've got a very valuable set of principles that we share internationally. And it will be interesting because some of these words will translate differently between our languages, so we'll see how this works. One of the most key social work principles is empowerment, and that is that we want to see people have the capacity of having their power. That's why it was so important for Muhammad to ask this woman, does she want a social worker? She had the power to say yes or no. When we think of someone's power, we also think of the resources that they bring, the answers that they bring. So each one of you has many, 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 many resources. And we, as a social worker, recognize this and we call it a strengths perspective. We recognize the strengths that every person has. The difficulty that many of us have across the world, many of us social workers have, is that social policy doesn't recognize the strengths of people. It doesn't recognize the resources in people. And so when the policy that we work with doesn't recognize your strength, and your strength, it assumes you have none. It assumes you don't have any power and that you just need a service. But social work sees your power. And when we see your power, the whole process of sustainability starts. So the social workers in the island in the Philippines, they saw the resource and the power of the community. They knew it was there. And these people then ended up leading their own development. They could catch their own fish rather than being fed a fish, which was the metaphor used. And that is the wonderful thing of social work. We always encourage people to take their power, to learn skills, to increase their knowledge, and to take control. And when people take control of their social situation, that is the sustainable factor. It's difficult for social workers because sometimes we work with policies that don't reinforce our approach. Professor Michiko Ohara here from Japan and I were in Turkey last November because in Turkey they had a huge earthquake about 2 years ago. And we went to visit the frontline service of the earthquake. And the government in Ankara, in the capital city, was trying to provide humanitarian aid and support and housing to the earthquake victims, but they weren't seeing the resources and the strengths of the earthquake survivors. There were doctors, teachers, people that could make clothes, people that could look after children, people that could provide yoga lessons, all sorts of people, just like us. But none of them were seen as being a part of the solution. And so although Professor O'Hara and I went 16 months after the earthquake, like this, people were still waiting for the humanitarian aid. And it was so difficult and frustrating for the social workers. So we're going to just now take a break for 5 minutes. And when we come back, I'm going to give you one more example of where social workers worked to change the policy of a country, where social workers changed the law, and what effect that had on the population. Okay, so we've been in Somalia, and we've been to the Philippines, and next we're going to go to another part of the world. We're going to go to Costa Rica, and I haven't got a very good map of Costa Rica. Sorry for that. Forget this. I'll explain this later. But Costa Rica is actually here between North America and South America. So Costa Rica has the ocean on both sides, and it has mountains in the middle, and it has very beautiful people. So it's a bit like Taiwan. But I think Costa Rica had a different political background, and for many, many decades, about 36% of the population lived in extreme poverty. Extreme poverty is defined by the United Nations as living on less than $2 per day. So this large population of people that lived in poverty had never gone to school, they live in slums, they don't have formal employment, they don't have access to medical care, and they had been like this for such a long time. And every year, the World Bank, as part of the United Nations, would give a lot of money to the government to help support these people, and the government would give cash transfers to the poor people. And the social workers noticed that even though people would be given a small amount of money, it didn't get them out of poverty. It actually maintained them in poverty. It kept people living in poverty. There was no social change. So decade after decade after decade, people would get small amounts of money, but nothing changed. So the social workers decided to do something about this problem. And they decided through their national association to have a national meeting. And the social workers from all over the country came together to work on a solution. The social workers realised there's no point in asking the government for more money for these poor people. The government wasn't going to get any more money from the World Bank. So something else had to change. So between them, they decided they were going to draft a new law for the country based on a social work approach. So social workers are not lawyers. We don't really know how to draft and write a law. But that didn't stop them. They did it anyway. And then they called the law in Spanish, because they speak Spanish there, but in English the law is called A Bridge to Development. And they went round to all the members of Parliament and said, this is why you must vote and support this legislation. Okay, so this law said that 5 government departments had to work together to find social solutions. The Department of Social Welfare, the Department of Health, the Department of Education, the Department of Schools, Education, and the last government department was the Department of Business Development or Business Innovation. And there was another part to the legislation. It said, in addition to the 5 government departments working together, they all have to share one objective. And that objective is to work to support what the poor people identify as the problems that need to change. So in the legislation, it was the poor people that would say how these government departments should work together. So the law was passed in 2015. And then the social workers, they went into the slums. They went into these communities where these people lived. And they would have meetings with the girls, meetings with the boys, meetings with the women, meetings with the men, and then meetings of them all together, asking them, what is it that you want for your development? Now, until 2015, the United Nations and all the international bodies for development, they believed they knew what poor people needed. They believed that if you gave poor people education and health, then they would somehow work out of poverty. And that was the strategy for decades of the United Nations and international funding. But the people in the slums in Costa Rica said, no, we don't want education. We don't want health facilities. And they looked at the social workers and they looked at the officials from the government. Are you crazy? If we send our girls and boys, but particularly our girls, to school, how are they going to concentrate on the lessons when they are being beaten at home? They said, do you think we will really use a health facility if we're going to be beaten by walking to it or walking from it? Our communities are not safe. We won't use health and education. What we need is to live without violence. So the social workers said, good, thank you for telling us, but this is something that you can change yourselves. And they supported the communities to set up community committees to control violence. At the front of the slums, they put big signs. This is a violence-free zone. If anyone committed violence in the community, they were asked to leave. And within a very short time, they reduced violence from eliminating it to somewhere between 90 and 100%, depending on the slum. And the communities, for the first time, had put this issue and made it a public issue. And for the first time, they'd organised a group over here in this part of the slum to be a committee, a group over here, a group over here, and then those committees would meet centrally. And then the social workers said, what is your next priority? And the next priority the community identified was to stop drug trafficking and children trafficking. Because drugs come up from South America up into North America, and there was a lot of drugs passing through, and the drug dealers would be getting children hooked on drugs to take the drugs from one point to another. And so the community then put another sign up in front of their slum. This is a drug-free zone. When they saw a strange person talking to young people, it was the job of every community member, every adult. Excuse me, who are you? Why are you in our community? Why are you talking to our children? All of this happened in the first few weeks and months. And then what was the next thing that the people wanted? And it wasn't education, and it wasn't health. They said, we need work, we need income, we need money. And so the social workers said, okay, let's do a skills audit in the community. In this slum of 500 people, you have 120 sewing machines. What can we make? What clothing can we make? In this community, you can catch fish. In this community, you can go into the forest and take the medication from the trees, the herbs and the medication from the trees. Social workers asked, do you want to have help taking these products to market, to develop a business plan, to be able to form a business? And the people said yes. So under the law, the Department of Business Development and Business Innovation had to help them make business plans, had to help them find business partners inside the country and outside the country. It had to help them develop websites. It had to teach them how to make business plans. And it did. Now, as the months went on, these communities started to feel they can do anything. They started to feel strong. And then they said, now we are ready for a school. Now we are ready for education. But there was some debate. The older ones said, hey, I never had education. Why should the children get education but not me? So the social workers got the officials from the Department of Education to come and arranged that they would bring schools into the slums, and they would have a special class for the children and a special class for the older ones that wanted to learn. And everybody was happy. So what happened is, after 12 months of the legislation being in place, there was an official drop of the poverty statistics by 6%. So it was 36 and it went down to 30 in 12 months. This is the people no longer living on $2 a day. They were living on more because they had income. They were quickly able to translate these plans into action. And after 24 months, on a different way of measuring poverty, on a different way of measuring poverty, it was there was a reduction of 42% in poverty, and that is by looking at what's called the multi-dimensional factors of poverty. So in 12 months, the official statistic rate came down by 6%, and in 24 months, it came down by 42%. And I'll talk about this slide afterwards. So this change was so significant that the United Nations started to pay attention to social work. It was at that time that they started to use social work as a reference point for development. The Secretary General of the United Nations at that time, Ban Ki-moon, said, we cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals without social work. Social work has the key for us. So what happened in Costa Rica was, without extra resources, but with a piece of legislation, that said, we will work with the communities around what they want. So many things happened so fast. It changed decades and decades of funding that didn't transform people out of poverty. But all of a sudden, people had access to health facilities. They developed nutrition and sanitation education, education for all people, business development, cooperative arrangements for employment. They focused on gender equality. They addressed domestic violence, and they also developed drug education programs. And this holistic approach, that's a word in social work, holistic, yeah? We know this word, was the key to moving people out of poverty in a sustainable way. So thank you so much. We have no more time. Thank you so much to all of you for having wonderful reflections. I look forward to meeting you again. Thank you to Professor Pan. Thank you to Jasper. Thank you to the Taiwanese Association of Social Workers. And we look forward to the next time we see each other.